In a small town of Sargada, a widow had discovered a mysterious remedy capable of rejuvenating the elderly. When a 70-year-old man consumed it, the results were so astonishing that anyone who heard the story would be left in disbelief. The potency of this remedy was extraordinary. It could awaken a vigor that had long been forgotten. At that moment, I found myself sitting before the wealthiest old man in our neighborhood. He was pouring out his heart, lamenting his frailty, while I patiently listened to his woes. In my bag, I carried the very formula that had turned countless aged souls into youthful versions of themselves. I never imagined the success of my remedy would reach such heights, drawing people from far-off places to seek me out. The thought of my remedy's fame brought me immense satisfaction. The old man in front of me continued to weep. His tears now streamed freely, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of amusement and frustration. At his age, with one foot already in the grave, he should have been contemplating his afterlife. Yet here he was, consumed by a desperate desire to reclaim his youth. A while later, he began pleading with me. "I know you have the remedy with you," he said, his voice trembling with urgency. "Please, hand it over to me. I'll pay you whatever you ask." His offer made my eyes gleam with excitement. After all, I was driven by greed. Since my husband's death, I had pursued every possible avenue to earn money, but none had brought me the fortune that this remedy had. However, I wasn't about to hand it over so easily. I wanted to make him suffer a little longer. I couldn't forget the day when I was desperate for money, and not a single soul in the neighborhood came forward to help me. It was a local auntie who had suggested approaching this very man, claiming he was wealthy and might assist me. But instead of offering help, he made an indecent proposal that left me feeling humiliated and degraded. Now here he was, groveling before me, and the sense of poetic justice brought a strange comfort to my heart. But little did I know, my desire to prolong his suffering would soon lead to my own. Eventually, I relented and decided to end his torment. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out the formula along with the specially prepared potion that I had crafted just for him. I had charged him a hefty sum, and before I could hand it over, the door swung open. His eldest son entered the room. Seeing me there, he froze in surprise. He always seemed taken aback whenever he saw me, and I never quite understood why. At first, I thought it might have been my tattered clothes back in the day. Perhaps he wondered what a destitute woman like me was doing in their grand house. But now, dressed in fine attire and adorned with expensive jewelry, his reactions were harder to explain. The old man subtly gestured for me to put the formula back into my bag, and I complied with a sly smile. I assumed his son would leave shortly, but instead he sat down and began engaging me in casual conversation. What baffled me was his line of questioning. He wanted to know about my past and even asked about my late husband. It struck me as odd. These were questions they should have asked long ago when I had nothing to my name. But now, with wealth and fame surrounding me, their sudden interest felt misplaced. When I truly needed their help, none of them came forward. Perhaps they received guidance far too late. Suddenly, the old man's son asked, "Why didn't you come to us for help when you became a widow? We always assist widows, not just with food, but also by providing them a place to stay. You were from our own neighborhood, after all." Hearing his words, I instinctively glanced at the old man. He averted his gaze, clearly uncomfortable. For a fleeting moment, I felt the urge to reveal everything to his son, that it was because of his father's cruelty that I had never come back. I wanted to tell him how his father had thrown me out of their house, shouting that I was never to return. But I chose to keep his father's secret and said nothing. The son stayed seated, chatting idly, while I remained silent, waiting for the right moment to hand over the remedy. But as another hour passed and he showed no signs of leaving, I grew impatient. I had other places to visit and more remedies to deliver. Finally, I stood up, realizing that staying any longer would only waste my time. As I prepared to leave, the old man called out to me, his voice filled with hope. "Please come tomorrow. I'll be eagerly waiting for you." I smiled faintly, glancing at his son, who was staring at me with a questioning expression. It was clear he wanted to ask what his father was talking about, but I offered no explanation and quietly left their house. My life had transformed completely. Not long ago, I struggled to afford even a meal. Now I had so much money that I could feed the entire neighborhood. And my wealth wouldn't even take a dent. That entire day, I roamed through various neighborhoods, handing out the remedy to eager old men. I was amazed by how many elderly men in the area harbored such desires. They were willing to pay exorbitant amounts, and I wasn't complaining. Later that night, as I finally returned home, my phone began to ring. I glanced at the screen. It was the same 70-year-old man. The sight of his number at such an hour both surprised and unsettled me. What could he possibly want now? When I answered, his request left me momentarily speechless. He insisted that I come to his house immediately and deliver the remedy, explaining that no one else was home at that hour. His urgency made me hesitate, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my sister standing there. Her unexpected arrival brought me relief. At least someone was there to look after my children. Seeing my smile, she asked, "What's making you so happy? I visit you all the time." I quickly explained, "I have some urgent work to attend to, and I didn't know who could stay with the kids. I'm so glad you came." She agreed to stay but added, "Make sure you're back within an hour. I can't stay here too long." I reassured her, "Don't worry, I'll be quick." Without resting or even drinking a glass of water, I stepped out again. The streets were eerily quiet, and I couldn't spot a rickshaw or car anywhere. Suddenly, I thought of the old man again. A sly smile spread across my face. I didn't need a rickshaw when his car was at my disposal. I quickly dialed his number. He picked up immediately, his voice brimming with impatience. "I've been waiting for your call," he exclaimed. "Where are you? Come quickly. I can't wait any longer." The old man's impatient voice carried through the phone. "I can't find a ride," I replied, pretending helplessness. "Don't worry about that," he reassured me. "I'll send my driver right away. He'll be there in 15 minutes. Just be ready. I can't tolerate any delays tonight." My patience has already run out. His desperation gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. Part of me wanted to test his endurance further. So instead of heading home, I strolled into a cafe. After a long day without food, I decided to sit down and have something to eat. I spent the next 30 minutes enjoying my meal, all the while ignoring the flurry of calls from both the old man and his driver. Each ring of the phone reminded me of how far I had come. I could never have imagined a time when I'd have this kind of power over someone who had once dismissed me so easily. Finally, after an additional hour of delays, I decided it was time to head back. By then, I had confirmed with my sister that she would stay the night to look after my children, which allowed me to proceed without any worries. When I got into the car, the driver shot me a sharp glare, his frustration evident. But his anger didn't faze me then, nor did it matter now. A short drive later, I arrived at the old man's house. He greeted me with an urgency that was almost frantic. "Quickly, give me the formula," he said, his voice trembling with anticipation. I opened my bag and pulled out the piece of paper containing the secret recipe. His face lit up with joy, but before he could celebrate further, he demanded, "Now give me the potion. I need to drink it immediately so I can regain my strength, so I can reclaim my life." It was then that I realized I'd made a mistake. In my haste, I had forgotten to bring the potion with me. Worse still, I couldn't remember where I had placed it back home. My heart sank as I struggled to find the right words to explain the situation. Seeing my hesitation, he grew agitated. "Why are you so quiet? Hand it over now, or I'll lose my mind," he yelled, his tone growing more unhinged. Sensing the situation escalating, I took a step back, trying to maintain some distance. "I'm sorry," I began cautiously. "I must have left the potion at home. I'll bring it tomorrow." My words sent him into a frenzy. He began shouting, his voice echoing through the room. "How could you do this to me? You've had me running after you for days, and now you tell me this?" His outburst bordered on disrespect, and I could feel my temper rising. "If you speak to me like that again," I warned sharply, "you'll regret it. Don't test my patience." Hearing this, he immediately softened his tone, folding his hands in a pleading gesture. "Please, I beg you, I've only asked for one thing. Show me mercy and give it to me." At that moment, I felt nothing but disdain for him. His desperation and groveling had stripped him of any dignity he once held. This was the same man who wouldn't tolerate anyone standing up to him, who never listened to others. Yet here he was, practically at my feet, begging. I had come to understand his weakness, and the thought of exploiting it further crossed my mind. But even as I considered it, I couldn't shake the feeling that the day I handed over that potion to him would set off a chain of events I might not be able to control. That day, he would treat me in such a way that I wouldn't even be able to face myself. If I had known earlier what awaited me, I would never have made the mistake of coming here. I stood silently, looking at his face, trying to mask my unease. Seeing me so quiet, he snapped, "Why are you just standing there? Go and bring the potion now." I took a deep breath and replied, "I can't get it right now. My children are home alone, so I'll return tomorrow with the remedy." Hearing this, he grabbed his hair in frustration, looking like a man on the brink of madness. His state resembled that of an addict denied his fix, and it was unsettling to watch. For a moment, I feared what might happen if he actually got his hands on the potion. It was clear that he would wreak havoc. What I didn't realize was that the driver had overheard everything. Perhaps the old man was also oblivious to this. As I stepped out of the room, the driver hurried over to me. "What remedy are you talking about? Is it true there's something that can restore strength and youth?" he asked, his curiosity barely contained. I gave him a cryptic smile and replied, "Yes, there is such a remedy, but it comes at a steep price. If you can afford it, only then should you talk to me. Otherwise, there's no need." With that, I walked away. But the driver wasn't done. He ran after me again and said, "I'm not here to buy it. I'm here to warn you. When you give that remedy to the old man, leave immediately. Don't stay even 2 minutes longer, or he'll treat you in a way that you won't be able to look yourself in the eye ever again." For a moment, his words sent a chill down my spine. The state I'd witnessed inside the room was enough to confirm that the old man could be dangerous. But I couldn't leave without the money. If I did, he might never pay me, and I'd suffer a significant loss. The man's behavior had already proven that he couldn't be trusted. Meanwhile, the driver's gaze shifted, becoming strange and judgmental. Perhaps he thought of me as a dubious character. Annoyed, I snapped at him. "This is none of your business. Stay out of it. I'll handle this my way, and I don't need your advice." He smirked and walked away, but then stopped abruptly and added, "I know you won't listen to me now, but when that man does what I'm warning you about, you can come to me afterward to share your sorrow. I'll try my best to comfort you." The vulgarity in his tone was unmistakable. Furious, I cursed him and told him to leave. He walked away, laughing, his shamelessness on full display. By now, I didn't even feel like going back with him. Instead, I hailed a taxi and went home. My head was pounding with pain, and my thoughts were in disarray. I couldn't believe how far I had let things go. It was becoming increasingly clear to me that promising that potion to the old man had been a grave mistake. I was sitting at home when my sister approached me and asked, "Why do you look so worried?" For a brief moment, I felt like confiding in her, but then I stopped myself. I didn't want her to worry because of me, so I buried the thoughts deep within my heart. However, I had made up my mind. I would go back the next day, but only at a time when all his family members would be present at his house. That way, if anything went wrong, there would at least be someone to help me. What I didn't anticipate was how cunning the old man truly was. Instead of calling me to his house, he had other plans. He would summon me to a place I had never heard of or even imagined visiting. The following morning at 8 a.m., the driver arrived to pick me up. I assumed he was taking me to the old man's house. But as soon as he veered the car onto an unfamiliar road, a wave of dread washed over me. "Where are you taking me?" I demanded. He tried to reassure me, saying, "Don't worry, I'm not kidnapping you. Baba asked me to take you to his farmhouse because no one from the household goes there." His words only heightened my fear. "I'm not going there," I told him firmly. "Tell Baba that if he wants the remedy, he can meet me at his house. I won't go anywhere else." The driver ignored my protest and replied, "You should have discussed this with him earlier. I don't have time to drive you around all day, so sit quietly." As the car continued down the unfamiliar path, my anxiety grew. Soon we were surrounded by a dense forest with a narrow road cutting through it. There were barely any vehicles in sight. If something were to happen to me here, there would be no one around to help. My body trembled with fear, though I didn't realize the driver was watching me through the rearview mirror. Seeing my terrified state, he chuckled and said, "You're already scared, and you haven't even seen anything yet." I silently cursed him in my mind, unable to voice my anger. I didn't want to provoke him, fearing he might lose his temper and harm me. I decided to stay quiet and avoid taking any unnecessary risks. 15 more minutes passed, yet there was no sign of the farmhouse. Gathering some courage, I asked, "You're not taking me somewhere for your own purpose, are you?" At this, he laughed loudly and said, "No, my luck hasn't sunk so low that I'd need to use a widow for my needs. You belong with that old man. Just think about him." Furious, I retorted, "I'm not thinking about him. I'm only here to do my job. Give him the remedy and take my payment." He didn't seem convinced and continued to look at me with suspicion. His judgmental gaze made me uneasy, but I ignored it. Finally, the car came to a stop in front of a large, beautiful farmhouse. My heart raced as I stepped inside, an overwhelming sense of foreboding gripping me. The old man was already waiting for me. He stood there smiling, his eyes fixed on me as if he'd been waiting for this moment. He extended his hand and said, "Give me the remedy." With trembling hands, I reached for my bag. My instincts screamed that something wasn't right, but I forced myself to stay calm. Before handing him the remedy, I firmly said, "Give me my payment first." To my surprise, he handed over the money without any hesitation. This left me both shocked and delighted. I quickly tucked the cash away, ready to leave, but he stopped me. "You're not going anywhere until I take this potion. I need to make sure it works and isn't a lie," he said with an unsettling calmness. I took a deep breath and thought, the potion takes time to work anyway. Let him take it. I'll leave before anything happens. As soon as he consumed the potion, his demeanor began to change. Initially struggling to even stand properly, he suddenly straightened up with an energy that startled me. I realized the potion was already beginning to work. My instincts screamed at me to leave immediately, but before I could, he grabbed my hand. Just as he was about to pull me closer, his eldest son entered the room. The sudden arrival of his son caught us both off guard. The old man quickly let go of my hand and tried to act normal. His son, noticing the tension, asked suspiciously, "What's going on here?" Relief washed over me at the sight of his son. The old man, trying to cover up, said, "I didn't plan to meet her here, but something urgent came up. I called her to help with a matter. I've already given her some money. Hopefully, she'll use it for her children's upbringing." His son seemed to accept the explanation, assuming his father had called me over to help me financially. I decided to play along and not say anything that might raise suspicion. Politely, I asked for permission to leave and took the opportunity to head back home, with his son accompanying me. I refused to trust the driver again, unwilling to risk my safety after what had happened. During the ride home, I silently thanked my luck for the unexpected intervention. A few weeks later, I used the money I'd earned to buy a small house in another city. There, I started a new life with my children, finally finding some peace. However, even now, whenever I think about that day, a shiver runs down my spine. I can't help but wonder, if his son hadn't arrived in time, what would that man have done to me? The thought alone is enough to haunt me.